3 months after the night that changed everything, Staff Sergeant Maria Rodriguez stood in the Rose Garden of the White House, wearing her dress blue uniform with ribbons that told the story of 12 years in the Marine Corps. Beside her, now Sergeant James Mitchell fidgeted with his collar, still uncomfortable with the attention their actions had generated. The investigation had lasted 6 weeks. Military police interviewed them dozens of times, asking the same questions from different angles, trying to understand how 2 Marines had accomplished what military doctrine said was impossible. Intelligence officers spent countless hours analyzing the documents Maria had captured from the Taliban command post, discovering a treasure trove of information about enemy operations throughout Afghanistan. The captured materials had led to the arrest of Taliban commanders across 3 provinces and prevented at least 2 major attacks on American forces. The intelligence value alone had justified their unauthorized raid, even without considering the 430 lives they had saved. But the political implications had proven even more significant than the military ones. The story of a female sniper defying orders to rescue an abandoned battalion had captured the American imagination in ways that surprised everyone. News networks ran features about Maria's background, her rise through the ranks in a male-dominated field, and her split-second decision to risk everything for fellow Marines. Congressional hearings had followed, with politicians demanding to know how a 2-person team had succeeded where official military channels had failed. The questions were uncomfortable for senior commanders, but they led to important changes in rules of engagement and authorization procedures for future operations. Ladies and gentlemen, the White House press secretary announced to the assembled crowd, the President of the United States. Maria stood at attention as President Obama walked across the Rose Garden lawn, flanked by senior military officers and administration officials. She had met him briefly during a private ceremony the previous day, but seeing the commander-in-chief again still felt surreal. "We gather today," the president began, "to honor 2 Marines whose courage and initiative exemplify the very best of American military service." Staff Sergeant Maria Rodriguez and Sergeant James Mitchell demonstrated that sometimes the highest form of military discipline is knowing when circumstances require extraordinary action. Maria listened to the formal language while her mind drifted back to that night in Afghanistan. She thought about the Marines she had watched through her scope, fighting desperately in an impossible situation. She thought about the radio calls for help that went unanswered, and the moment she decided that following orders mattered less than saving lives. The actions of these 2 Marines prevented what could have been the largest loss of American life in a single engagement since the beginning of operations in Afghanistan. The president continued. Their unauthorized raid disrupted enemy operations, captured valuable intelligence, and, most importantly, ensured that 430 Marines returned home to their families. The ceremony was being broadcast live on military networks worldwide. In Afghanistan, Iraq, and dozens of other locations, American service members were watching their fellow Marines receive recognition for doing what many considered impossible. However, we must also acknowledge that their actions raised important questions about military authority, the chain of command, and the circumstances under which individual initiative should override institutional procedures. Maria appreciated that the president wasn't glossing over the complexity of their situation. They had saved lives, but they had also violated fundamental principles of military discipline. Both realities had to be acknowledged. After extensive investigation and consultation with military leadership, it has been determined that their actions, while irregular, were justified by the extraordinary circumstances they faced and the lives they saved. The formal punishment had been surprisingly light. Both Marines received written reprimands that would remain in their service records, but wouldn't prevent future promotions. Maria had been transferred to a training command where she would help develop new sniper techniques, while Mitchell had been assigned to an elite reconnaissance unit. More importantly, their case had led to changes in military doctrine. New procedures now allowed for greater individual initiative when communication with higher command was impossible and American lives were at immediate risk. "It is my honor," the president said, "to present the Navy Cross to Staff Sergeant Maria Rodriguez for extraordinary heroism in combat against enemy forces." Maria stepped forward as the president pinned the medal to her uniform. The Navy Cross was the second highest decoration for valor in the Navy and Marine Corps, recognizing courage that went far beyond the call of duty. And the Silver Star to Sergeant James Mitchell for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity in action against enemy forces. Mitchell received his medal with the same quiet dignity he had shown throughout their ordeal. The young Marine had proven himself under impossible circumstances and earned recognition that would follow him throughout his career. After the ceremony, Maria found herself in the White House receiving line, shaking hands with politicians, military officers, and civilian officials who wanted to meet the female sniper who had defied orders to save a Marine battalion. Senator John McCain, himself a veteran and former prisoner of war, spent several minutes talking with her about the evolution of women's roles in combat. What you did proves that courage and competence matter more than traditional assumptions about gender in warfare, he said. General James Mattis, the Marine Corps commandant, pulled her aside for a private conversation. Rodriguez, you put us all in a difficult position with your actions. But you also reminded us why we serve. Sometimes the spirit of our mission matters more than the letter of our regulations. The reception lasted several hours, but Maria found herself thinking about the Marines who hadn't made it to Washington. 3 members of the Trap Battalion had died from their wounds despite successful extraction. Their families would never see them receive medals or recognition because heroism couldn't bring back the dead. Late that evening, Maria and Mitchell sat in a quiet hotel bar near the White House, still wearing their dress uniforms and processing the day's events. You know what's strange? Mitchell said, staring into his beer. All this attention for doing what felt like the only possible choice at the time. Military heroism is often just ordinary people making extraordinary decisions under pressure, Maria replied. We weren't trying to be heroes. We were just trying to bring our Marines home. Think it was worth it? Everything that came after, I mean. Maria considered the question carefully. The investigation had been stressful, the media attention overwhelming, and the uncertainty about their futures had lasted for months. But 430 Marines had returned to their families instead of coming home in flag-draped coffins. Ask me again in 20 years, she said finally. When some of those Marines have had time to raise their children and live the lives they wouldn't have had if we'd followed orders that night. 6 months later, Maria was teaching advanced sniper techniques to Marine recruits at Quantico when she received an unexpected package. Inside was a photo album filled with pictures from the wedding of Lance Corporal David Santos, one of the Marines from the Trap Battalion. A handwritten note from the young Marine's mother was tucked inside the front cover. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, my son told me what you did in Afghanistan. Because of your courage, I was able to walk him down the aisle last month. These photos are my way of saying thank you for bringing my boy home. Maria turned through pages of wedding photos showing a young Marine in his dress blues, smiling beside his new bride, surrounded by family and friends who had almost lost him in the Afghan desert. The images represented all the moments that wouldn't have existed if she had followed orders that night. That evening, she called Mitchell at his new assignment with Force Reconnaissance. Remember when you asked if it was worth it? Yeah, why? I got my answer today. 5 years later, Staff Sergeant Rodriguez was promoted to Gunnery Sergeant and assigned as the senior instructor at the Marine Corps Scout Sniper School. Her unauthorized raid in Afghanistan had become a case study in military ethics courses, with cadets debating the balance between following orders and exercising moral judgment. The 430 Marines she had helped save continued their lives and careers. Some remained in the military, others returned to civilian life, but all of them carried the knowledge that someone had been willing to risk everything when they needed help most. Mitchell completed multiple deployments with Special Operations Forces before retiring as a Master Sergeant. He and Maria remained close friends, bound by their shared experience and the weight of decisions made under fire. The Taliban command structure they had disrupted that night never fully recovered. Intelligence gathered from the captured documents led to operations that eliminated key enemy leaders and prevented dozens of attacks on coalition forces. The ripple effects of their unauthorized raid continued for years after the night it occurred. In 2018, Maria Rodriguez retired from the Marine Corps after 20 years of service. Her final assignment was as the senior enlisted advisor for a Marine Expeditionary Unit, where she helped train the next generation of Marines who would face their own impossible choices in future conflicts. During her retirement ceremony, General Robert Neller, then Commandant of the Marine Corps, spoke about the legacy of her actions in Afghanistan. Gunnery Sergeant Rodriguez demonstrated that the highest form of military discipline sometimes requires the courage to act beyond the narrow confines of orders and regulations. Her example reminds us that we serve something greater than institutional procedures. We serve each other. Today, Maria Rodriguez works as a civilian contractor, teaching marksmanship to military and law enforcement agencies. She rarely speaks publicly about the night that made her famous, preferring to let others debate the ethics and implications of her actions. But once each year, on the anniversary of the raid, she receives messages from the Marines she helped save. Some are now senior officers leading troops of their own. Others have become teachers, businessmen, fathers, and community leaders. All of them remember the night when a female sniper decided that saving lives mattered more than following orders. Their messages are brief and heartfelt. Thank you for bringing us home. For Maria Rodriguez, those 4 words justify everything that came after. In a career filled with commendations and decorations, they remain the recognition that matters most. Because in the end, military service isn't about medals or ceremonies. It's about the willingness to risk everything for the Marines standing beside you, regardless of what the regulations say. The story of the night 430 Marines were abandoned and then saved by a 2-person unauthorized raid has become part of Marine Corps legend. It's taught in leadership courses, analyzed in military journals, and debated in academic conferences about military ethics. But for the people who lived through it, the story is much simpler. It's about ordinary Marines making an extraordinary choice when their brothers and sisters needed help. It's about the willingness to defy authority when moral duty demands action. And it's about the truth that the most important military discipline is the courage to do what's right, regardless of the personal cost. Staff Sergeant Maria Rodriguez proved that night in Afghanistan that sometimes one person with a rifle and the determination to act can change the course of history. Her legacy reminds every Marine that they serve something greater than themselves, and that legacy will endure long after the last veteran of the Afghan war has returned home. Dawn broke cold and clear across the Nevada desert, with visibility stretching to the horizon in every direction. Maria Blackfeather emerged from the barracks to find the other competitors already moving through their morning routines. Some were conducting final equipment checks, while others engaged in elaborate warm-up exercises or meditation rituals designed to center their focus for the challenges ahead. The second day's agenda promised to test every aspect of snipercraft. Moving targets would challenge tracking abilities and timing. Extreme long-range shots would push equipment and skill to absolute limits. Most intimidating of all, scenario-based exercises would attempt to replicate the stress and complexity of actual combat situations. Captain Morrison gathered the competitors around the first shooting position as the sun climbed higher in the morning sky. "Gentlemen and ladies," he began, his voice carrying clearly in the crisp air. "Yesterday was about fundamentals. Today is about proving that you can perform when the mission depends on it. The targets you'll be engaging represent real-world scenarios that every one of you might face in combat. The first challenge involved targets moving at various speeds across the range at distances between 800 and 1,200 meters. These weren't simple left-to-right movements, but complex patterns that required shooters to anticipate target position while accounting for bullet flight time. The mathematics involved were complex, but Maria had learned through experience that overthinking the calculations often led to missed opportunities. Chen stepped up to the firing line first, his confidence evident in every movement. He studied the target pattern for several minutes, muttering calculations under his breath and making minute adjustments to his scope. When he finally took the shot, the bullet struck the moving target's center mass, earning appreciative nods from other competitors. His follow-up shots were equally impressive, demonstrating the kind of technical proficiency that had earned him his reputation. Rodriguez followed with similar results, his shots tracking the moving targets with mechanical precision. The two SEALs exchanged satisfied glances, clearly pleased with their performance and confident in their continued dominance of the competition. Kane approached the moving target challenge with his characteristic methodical style. He spent less time on calculations and more time simply observing the targets, watching their movements with the patient attention of a predator. His shots were less flashy than the SEALs, but equally effective. Each bullet found its mark with the kind of inevitable precision that spoke to years of experience. When Maria's turn came, she felt the weight of expectation from the other competitors. Her performance on the first day had been solid, but not spectacular, and she could sense that some of them were waiting for her to falter under increased pressure. She settled into her shooting position and began tracking the targets through her scope. The first target appeared at 1,000 meters, moving from left to right at approximately 15 miles per hour. Maria's training told her to calculate lead time based on target speed and bullet flight time, but her grandfather's voice whispered different advice. Instead of fighting to impose her will on the shot, she allowed herself to become part of the target's movement, feeling its rhythm and timing her shot to coincide with what felt like the natural moment. The bullet struck the target squarely in the center, earning a murmur of approval from the observing officials. Her subsequent shots continued the pattern, each one finding its mark with the kind of fluid precision that looked effortless but required complete integration of technical skill and intuitive understanding. By mid-morning, the competition had moved to extreme long-range challenges that would test every competitor's absolute limits. Targets were positioned at distances stretching from 2,000 meters out to an almost unbelievable 3,500 meters. At these ranges, factors that were minor considerations at shorter distances became critical variables that could determine success or failure. Earth's rotation became a significant factor, causing bullets to drift in directions that most people never considered. Temperature variations between the firing position and target area created density changes that affected bullet trajectory. Even the curvature of the Earth began to influence bullet drop at the longest ranges. Chen approached the extreme distance challenge with visible excitement. These were the kinds of shots that separated elite snipers from merely competent ones, and he clearly relished the opportunity to demonstrate his capabilities. His first shot at 2,500 meters landed close enough to the target to earn a scoring hit, though not in the center ring. His second attempt, at 3,000 meters, sailed wide of the target entirely. "These conditions are absolutely impossible," he announced to anyone within earshot. "The wind shear at these distances is completely unpredictable. No one could consistently hit targets under these circumstances." Rodriguez was experiencing similar difficulties, his usually precise shots scattered around the target area without finding the center ring. The technical approach that had served him well at shorter ranges seemed inadequate for the complex calculations required at extreme distances. Kane's methodical approach proved more successful at the longer ranges. His shots weren't always perfect, but they consistently found the target area. He seemed less concerned with achieving perfect center hits than with demonstrating consistent accuracy within acceptable parameters. When Maria stepped up to engage the extreme distance targets, she felt a strange sense of calm settle over her. These distances were beyond anything she had attempted in combat, but they didn't feel impossible. Her grandfather had taught her to shoot at distances that seemed unreasonable for a .22 rifle, stretching the capabilities of equipment and ammunition far beyond manufacturer specifications. Her first shot at 2,500 meters struck the target ring, not perfect, but certainly within scoring range. The second shot, at 3,000 meters, landed even closer to center. But it was her third attempt, at the maximum range of 3,500 meters, that drew surprised attention from everyone present. Maria had spent nearly 10 minutes studying the target through her scope, watching heat mirage patterns and observing subtle wind indicators that were barely visible at such distances. She wasn't calculating in the traditional sense, but rather allowing her subconscious to process dozens of environmental variables simultaneously. When she finally squeezed the trigger, the shot felt exactly right. The bullet's flight time at that distance was nearly 4 seconds, long enough for everyone present to track its progress through binoculars. When the impact was confirmed in the target's center ring, a surprised silence fell over the group. Even the competition officials seemed taken aback by the precision of the shot. "Lucky," Chen muttered, just loudly enough for others to hear. "At these distances, it's more about chance than skill anyway." But Maria could see uncertainty in his expression. What he had dismissed as luck looked suspiciously like consistent performance when combined with her other shots. She wasn't just hanging in there anymore. She was beginning to pull ahead of some very accomplished shooters. The afternoon scenario-based exercises were designed to test performance under stress. Competitors would be required to move through simulated combat environments, identify and engage targets while managing time pressure and physical obstacles. These exercises were intended to replicate the conditions that snipers might face in actual operations. The first scenario placed each shooter in a high position overlooking a mock village where multiple targets would appear at various times and locations. Some targets were legitimate military threats that should be engaged immediately. Others were civilians or friendly forces that should not be fired upon under any circumstances. The exercise tested not just shooting accuracy, but judgment and target identification skills. Maria found herself thinking about her deployments to Afghanistan, where similar decisions had carried life and death consequences. She remembered the weight of responsibility that came with each shot, knowing that a mistake could result in civilian casualties or friendly fire incidents. The scenario exercises were sophisticated simulations, but they couldn't fully replicate the emotional and psychological pressure of real combat. Chen approached the scenario with typical confidence, but Maria noticed that his performance seemed more mechanical than intuitive. He correctly identified and engaged the appropriate targets, but his movements and decisions followed a textbook approach that lacked the adaptability required for truly chaotic situations. Rodriguez performed similarly, demonstrating solid technical competence without the flexibility that distinguished truly exceptional operators. Both SEALs were clearly well-trained and highly skilled, but their approach seemed limited by adherence to standard procedures rather than enhanced by them. Kane's performance in the scenarios revealed why he had earned his reputation over 15 years of service. He moved through the exercises with an economy of motion and decision-making that spoke to extensive real-world experience. His shots were precise and timely, but, more importantly, his target selection demonstrated the kind of judgment that only came from having faced similar decisions under actual fire. When Maria's turn came, she found herself drawing not just on her military training, but on hunting experiences from her childhood. Her grandfather had taught her to track game through difficult terrain, to remain motionless for hours while waiting for the perfect shot, and to distinguish between legitimate targets and protected animals based on subtle visual cues. She moved through the scenario exercise with a fluid grace that surprised even herself. Her shots were accurate, but it was her target identification and timing that set her apart. She seemed to anticipate target appearances and identify threats before they became obvious to observers. Her performance had an intuitive quality that complemented her technical skills. By late afternoon, the preliminary rounds had concluded, and competition officials began tallying scores to determine which shooters would advance to the final challenges. The field would be cut from 12 competitors to 6, and those 6 would face the ultimate test of their abilities. As scores were calculated and verified, tension among the competitors became increasingly evident. Chun and Rodriguez maintained their confident demeanor, but Maria could see signs of concern in their expressions. Their dominance of the early stages had given way to unexpectedly strong competition from several quarters. Kane seemed unconcerned with the scoring process, focusing instead on equipment maintenance and preparation for whatever challenges might come next. His confidence was quiet but unmistakable, built on years of consistent performance rather than recent successes. Captain Morrison announced the 6 finalists as the sun began to set over the Nevada desert. The list included the expected names: Chun and Rodriguez from the SEALs, Kane from the Marines, and Park from the Air Force. But the final 2 positions went to competitors who had emerged from relative obscurity during the day's challenges. Maria Blackfeather's name was called 5th, earning surprised glances from several competitors who had clearly expected her to be eliminated earlier in the process. Her consistent accuracy across all distances and scenarios had accumulated into one of the highest total scores. The sixth and final position went to Army Staff Sergeant James Mitchell, whose steady performance had been overshadowed by more dramatic successes and failures among other competitors. As the 6 finalists gathered for the final briefing, Maria could feel the dynamic among the group beginning to shift. She was no longer an unknown quantity or a token presence. Her performance had earned her a place among the most elite shooters in the American military, and that achievement was beginning to register with both competitors and officials. Chin's attitude toward her had evolved from dismissive to cautious. He still projected confidence, but Maria noticed that he was paying closer attention to her equipment and technique. Rodriguez seemed genuinely puzzled by her success, studying her with the kind of analytical attention usually reserved for mechanical problems. Kane's reaction was more subtle but perhaps more significant. The veteran Marine had begun acknowledging her with the kind of professional nod typically reserved for proven operators. It wasn't full acceptance, but it was recognition that she had earned through performance rather than politics. The final challenge would take place the following morning, and its nature remained secret from the competitors. Captain Morrison's only hint was that it would test every skill they had demonstrated over the previous 2 days, but under conditions that none of them had experienced before. That evening, as Maria prepared her equipment for the final day of competition, she reflected on how much the experience had already changed. She had arrived hoping to prove that she belonged among elite military snipers. Instead, she had discovered that she might be something more than just competent. Her grandfather's teachings, combined with her military training and combat experience, had created capabilities that even she hadn't fully understood. The real test was still ahead, but Maria Blackfeather was no longer the unknown factor in the competition. She had become a legitimate contender, and tomorrow would determine just how far her unique combination of skills could take her. The third morning arrived with an unusual weather pattern that would complicate every shot fired throughout the day. High-pressure systems had created temperature inversions that caused unpredictable wind patterns across the range, while increasing humidity added another variable to ballistic calculations. For most shooters, these conditions represented a significant obstacle. For Maria Blackfeather, they felt like a return to familiar territory. Captain Morrison assembled the 6 finalists before dawn, their breath visible in the cool desert air as he outlined the day's ultimate challenge. "What you're about to attempt has never been done in military competition," he announced, his voice carrying unusual gravity. "We've identified targets at distances that represent the absolute edge of what's possible with current military equipment and ammunition." Behind him, range officials were setting up equipment that would measure and verify shots at distances exceeding anything the competitors had previously attempted. Electronic sensors, high-powered optics, and even acoustic detection systems would track bullet performance across ranges that stretched beyond the visible horizon. "The final challenge consists of 3 shots," Morrison continued. "The first at 3,200 meters, which represents the current unofficial record for confirmed military kills. The second at 3,500 meters, which is at the theoretical limit of effective range for your rifles and ammunition. And the third," he paused for dramatic effect, "the third shot will be at 3,800 meters, a distance that most ballistics experts consider impossible under field conditions." Chin's confidence, which had been shaken by the previous day's results, seemed to return with the announcement of extreme distances. These were the kinds of shots that separated legends from merely competent snipers, and he clearly believed this was his opportunity to reassert dominance. "Finally," he said, just loudly enough for the other finalists to hear, "a real test of sniper skills." Rodriguez nodded agreement, but Maria noticed tension in his posture that suggested his confidence wasn't as solid as his teammates. The previous day's struggles with extreme distance shooting had revealed limitations in his technical approach that he was still trying to resolve. Kane listened to the briefing with his characteristic impassive expression, but Maria could see calculation in his eyes. 15 years of experience had taught him to assess challenges objectively, and these distances were beyond anything he had attempted even in combat. His reaction suggested respect for the difficulty rather than excitement about the opportunity. Park seemed overwhelmed by the scope of the challenge. Her technical approach had served her well at conventional distances, but the extreme ranges announced by Morrison were far beyond her experience or training. She was clearly questioning whether her equipment and skills were adequate for what lay ahead. Staff Sergeant Mitchell appeared to be conducting mental calculations, probably trying to determine whether standard ballistic formulas would even apply at the announced distances. His methodical approach had brought him this far, but these shots would require capabilities beyond pure technical competence. As the competitors moved to their assigned shooting positions, Maria found herself thinking about conversations with her grandfather that had seemed irrelevant to military service. Joseph Blackfeather had often spoken about the connection between shooter and target that transcended simple mechanical considerations. At extreme distances, he had told her, the bullet travels so far that it becomes part of the landscape. You have to understand not just where you want it to go, but how the entire environment will guide it there. His words had seemed mystical rather than practical when she first heard them as a teenager. But years of combat experience had taught her that successful long-range shooting involved factors that couldn't be calculated or measured. Environmental conditions, equipment variations, even the shooter's physical and mental state contributed to outcomes in ways that purely technical approaches couldn't account for. The shooting positions had been carefully selected to provide clear lines of sight across the maximum distances while offering realistic field conditions. No artificial supports or laboratory-perfect environments would assist the shooters. They would be firing from prone positions using only the equipment they had carried throughout the competition. Chen took his position with obvious enthusiasm, spending considerable time adjusting his scope and calculating environmental factors. At 3,200 meters, bullet drop would be measured in dozens of feet, wind drift could exceed several meters, and even the Coriolis effect of Earth's rotation would influence bullet trajectory. His technical approach required him to account for variables that most people never considered. His first shot at 3,200 meters sailed wide of the target, missing by what appeared to be several meters. The electronic detection systems confirmed a miss, and Chen's expression shifted from confidence to concern. His second attempt at the same distance struck the target area, but well outside the scoring rings. The wind conditions are completely unpredictable at these distances, he announced to the observing officials. These shots are more about luck than skill. No one could consistently hit targets under these circumstances. Rodriguez stepped up next, his technical calculations even more elaborate than his teammates. He spent nearly 20 minutes studying environmental conditions and making scope adjustments before attempting his first shot. The bullet struck closer to the target than Chen's attempts, but still failed to achieve a scoring hit. His frustration was evident as he prepared for his second shot at 3,200 meters. The technical approach that had served him throughout his career seemed inadequate for the complex variables present at extreme distances. His second attempt missed the target entirely, disappearing into the desert beyond the effective range of the detection systems. Kane approached the challenge with characteristic patience, spending less time on calculations and more on simply observing the environment. His years of experience had taught him that successful extreme distance shooting required intuitive understanding that complemented technical knowledge. His first shot at 3,200 meters achieved a scoring hit, though not in the center rings. Park's attempts at the extreme distances revealed the limitations of a purely technical approach when pushed beyond normal parameters. Her shots scattered around the target area without achieving consistent accuracy, and her increasing frustration was obvious to all observers. Mitchell's methodical approach proved more successful than expected at the initial extreme distance, achieving one scoring hit out of his 2 attempts. But his success seemed to surprise even him, and his confidence appeared shaken by the margin between success and failure at these ranges. When Maria's turn came, she settled into her shooting position with the same calm focus that had characterized her performance throughout the competition. But instead of immediately beginning technical calculations, she spent several minutes simply breathing and observing the environment through her scope. Her grandfather had taught her that at extreme distances, the shooter became part of a system that included the rifle, ammunition, environmental conditions, and even the target itself. Fighting any element of that system was futile. Success required integration and harmony rather than domination. Her first shot at 3,200 meters felt exactly right from the moment she squeezed the trigger. The bullet's flight time at that distance was nearly 4 seconds, long enough for everyone present to track its progress through high-powered optics. When the impact was confirmed in the target's center ring, a surprised silence fell over the group. "Exceptional shot," Morrison announced, his voice carrying a note of genuine admiration. "That's the kind of precision we expect from world-class snipers." Chin's response was immediate and dismissive. "Lucky shot," he muttered. "At these distances, accuracy is more about chance than skill. Let's see if she can do it again." But Maria could see uncertainty in his expression that contradicted his words. Her consistent performance throughout the competition was beginning to establish a pattern that couldn't be dismissed as simple luck. The second phase of the challenge moved to 3,500 meters, a distance that represented the theoretical limit of effectiveness for their rifles and ammunition. At this range, bullets would be dropping nearly 80 feet from their initial trajectory, and wind drift could exceed 10 meters depending on conditions. Chen approached the 3,500-meter challenge with renewed determination, but his increasing frustration was evident in his preparation routine. His shots at this distance missed the target area entirely, disappearing into the desert beyond the range of detection systems. His confidence, which had carried him through the early stages of competition, was clearly shaken by his inability to adapt to extreme distance shooting. Rodriguez managed one shot that struck the target area at 3,500 meters, but well outside the scoring rings. His technical calculations seemed inadequate for the complex variables present at these extreme ranges, and his second attempt missed completely. Kane's experience proved valuable at the extended distance, achieving one marginal scoring hit out of his 2 attempts. But even his veteran expertise was being stretched to its limits by conditions that exceeded normal training parameters. When Maria engaged the 3,500-meter target, she again spent considerable time simply observing and breathing before taking her shot. Her approach seemed almost meditative, as if she was entering a mental state that allowed her subconscious to process environmental variables that her conscious mind couldn't calculate. Her shot at 3,500 meters struck the target's center ring with the same precision she had demonstrated at the shorter extreme distance. The electronic confirmation of her hit prompted murmurs of amazement from the observing officials and uncomfortable silence from some competitors. "How is she doing this?" Rodriguez asked Chun in a voice that carried clearly across the range. The ballistics at these distances should make consistent accuracy impossible. Chin's response was barely audible, but his expression suggested that he was beginning to question his own assumptions about what was possible at extreme distances. The final phase of the challenge represented something unprecedented in military competition. At 3,800 meters, the targets were barely visible even through high-powered optics. Bullet drop would exceed 100 feet, wind drift could reach 15 meters or more, and the flight time would stretch beyond 5 seconds. Most ballistics experts considered consistent accuracy impossible at such distances under field conditions. The variables were too numerous and complex for human calculation, and even minor environmental changes could cause complete misses. This was the realm of theoretical possibility rather than practical application. Chun approached the ultimate distance challenge with visible trepidation. His confidence had been progressively eroded by failures at shorter extreme distances, and he seemed to be going through the motions rather than attempting a shot he believed possible. Both of his attempts at 3,800 meters missed by significant margins. Rodriguez declined to attempt the ultimate distance shots, declaring the challenge beyond reasonable expectations for field conditions. His withdrawal from the final phase represented an acknowledgement that his technical approach had reached its limits. Kane made one attempt at 3,800 meters, but his shot missed the target area entirely. Even his 15 years of experience couldn't bridge the gap between possible and practical at such extreme ranges. Park and Mitchell also declined to attempt shots at the ultimate distance, recognizing that their skills and equipment weren't adequate for the challenge. As Maria prepared for her attempts at 3,800 meters, the range fell unusually quiet. She was the only competitor willing and able to attempt shots at a distance that most experts considered impossible. The weight of expectation from officials, competitors, and even herself created a pressure unlike anything she had experienced. But as she settled into her shooting position and began studying the target through her scope, her grandfather's voice seemed to whisper advice that transcended technical training. At this distance, success would require complete integration of every skill she had learned, both military and traditional. The shot would be as much about faith and intuition as calculation and technique. Her first attempt at 3,800 meters felt perfect from the moment she squeezed the trigger, but the extreme distance made confirmation impossible through normal observation. The electronic detection systems would need several seconds to track the bullet's flight and determine impact location. When the confirmation came back as a center ring hit, the silence on the range was complete. Even Captain Morrison seemed stunned by the precision of a shot that most experts considered impossible under field conditions. Maria Blackfeather had just achieved something that would rewrite the standards for extreme distance shooting in military competition. But her success was about to transform her from an accomplished competitor into something approaching legend. The electronic confirmation of Maria's 3,800-meter hit created a moment of absolute silence that stretched across the Nevada desert like a held breath. Range officials scrambled to verify their detection systems, while competitors and observers struggled to process what they had just witnessed. Captain Morrison stood frozen, staring at the electronic displays as if they might change if he looked long enough. Chun was the first to break the silence, his voice carrying a mixture of disbelief and defensive anger. "That's impossible," he declared, loud enough for everyone to hear. "No one makes shots at that distance under field conditions. There has to be some kind of equipment malfunction or measurement error." Rodriguez nodded vigorous agreement, his face flushed with frustration and something approaching embarrassment. "The detection systems must be malfunctioning. These distances are beyond the effective range of the rifles we're using. Physics doesn't allow for that kind of accuracy." But even as they voiced their objections, both SEALs were staring at Maria with expressions that suggested they were beginning to question their own understanding of what was possible. Her calm demeanor in the face of their protests only added to their confusion and growing unease. Kane studied the electronic readouts with the careful attention of someone trying to solve a complex tactical problem. 15 years of combat experience had taught him to trust verified data over personal assumptions, and the detection systems were clearly functioning properly. His expression revealed a mixture of professional respect and genuine puzzlement. "I've never seen anything like this," he admitted quietly. "I've made some long shots in my career, but nothing approaching this distance. If those readings are accurate, she's just rewritten the book on extreme distance shooting." Captain Morrison was coordinating with range officials to triple-check all detection systems and verify the accuracy of the measurements. The implications of a confirmed 3,800-meter shot were enormous, potentially establishing new standards for military marksmanship and raising questions about current training methodologies. "All systems confirm the impact," announced Technical Sergeant Williams, the senior range official. "Impact location is confirmed at target center, distance measured at 3,847 meters actual. Environmental conditions at time of shot. Wind variable from southwest at 8 to 12 miles per hour. Temperature 68 degrees Fahrenheit. Humidity 45%. The technical confirmation seemed to deflate some of the skepticism among competitors, but it also raised new questions about how such a shot was possible. At nearly 3,900 meters, the bullet had traveled for over 5 seconds, dropping more than 100 feet from its initial trajectory, while fighting crosswinds that should have deflected it dozens of feet off target. Maria remained focused on her rifle and preparation for her second attempt at the ultimate distance. She could hear the conversations swirling around her, but her attention was directed inward, maintaining the mental state that had enabled her extraordinary performance. Her grandfather had taught her that external validation was less important than internal understanding, and she wasn't shooting for the amazement of others. Her second shot at 3,800 meters felt even more certain than the first, if such a thing was possible. The rifle seemed to disappear from her consciousness, becoming an extension of her body rather than a separate tool. The target, barely visible even through her scope, felt connected to her by an invisible line that her bullet would simply follow. The confirmation of her second center ring hit at 3,800 meters eliminated any remaining possibility of equipment malfunction or measurement error. Maria Blackfeather had achieved something unprecedented in military competition, and her success was forcing everyone present to reconsider their assumptions about the limits of human marksmanship. Chen's reaction to the second confirmed hit was immediate and intense. "This is ridiculous," he announced loudly. "No one shoots like this without some kind of assistance. I want to inspect her equipment, her ammunition, everything. There has to be an explanation that doesn't involve impossible shooting." His accusation hung in the air like a challenge, and Maria could feel the tension among the group shift into something more confrontational. She was no longer just an unexpected competitor. She had become a problem that threatened the established order of military sniper hierarchy. Captain Morrison stepped forward, his expression indicating that he was struggling to maintain official neutrality in the face of extraordinary circumstances. "All equipment inspections were conducted according to standard protocols," he announced. "Staff Sergeant Blackfeather is using the same rifle, ammunition, and optical systems as every other competitor. Her equipment has been verified as completely standard." But even Morrison seemed troubled by Maria's performance, as if her success challenged fundamental assumptions about what was possible within established military training systems. The uncomfortable reality was that she had achieved something that their doctrine suggested should be impossible. Rodriguez was examining Maria's shooting position with the intensity of someone trying to solve a mechanical problem. "Look at her technique," he said to Chun. "She's not using any of the standard calculations for extreme distance shooting. She's not even using proper windage adjustments. How is she compensating for all the environmental variables?" It was Kane who provided the most insightful observation, his years of experience allowing him to recognize something that the younger SEALs were missing. "Watch how she prepares for each shot," he said quietly. "She's not fighting the conditions, she's working with them. It's like she's reading the environment at a level that most of us don't even understand." His words carried weight because they came from someone whose own extreme distance shooting had earned respect throughout the sniper community. If Kane was impressed, other shooters had to take notice. As the competition moved toward its conclusion, the atmosphere among competitors and officials had fundamentally changed. What had begun as a routine test of marksmanship skills had evolved into something approaching a paradigm shift in understanding of human shooting capabilities. Maria's final shots at each distance had been equally impressive, establishing a level of consistency that eliminated luck as an explanation for her performance. Her approach to extreme distance shooting appeared to involve capabilities that weren't being taught in any military sniper school, raising questions about whether current training methodologies were missing crucial elements. The afternoon debriefing took place in a tension-filled conference room, where competition results were officially tabulated and announced. Maria had not only won the competition, she had dominated it in a way that left other competitors struggling to understand what they had witnessed. Captain Morrison's announcement of the final results was delivered with the kind of careful formality that suggested he was still processing the implications. The winner of this year's inter-service sniper competition, with unprecedented scores at extreme distances, is Army Staff Sergeant Maria Blackfeather. Chen's response was immediate and predictable. "I want a complete investigation of this competition," he declared. "Something about these results doesn't add up. No one improves their shooting performance by that magnitude during a single competition without some kind of assistance or advantage." His accusations were becoming increasingly specific and personal, moving beyond general skepticism toward direct challenges to Maria's integrity. The room fell silent as everyone waited to see how she would respond to increasingly hostile questioning of her achievements. Maria stood slowly, her expression calm but her posture indicating that she had reached the limit of her patience with the ongoing accusations. "I understand that my performance is unexpected," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the room. "But everything I've done here has been accomplished with standard equipment under standard conditions with official observation." Her words were measured and professional, but there was steel underneath that suggested she was prepared to defend both her achievements and her integrity against any challenge. Rodriguez attempted a different approach, trying to sound more scientific than accusatory. Could you explain your technique for extreme distance shooting? Your approach seems fundamentally different from standard military methodology. How are you making those calculations? The question was reasonable, but Maria could hear the underlying assumption that her success must be based on some secret knowledge or hidden advantage that she could reveal and explain. The reality was more complex and less transferable than they imagined. My grandfather taught me to shoot when I was 8 years old, she replied. His approach emphasized understanding the entire system rather than just calculating individual variables. At extreme distances, there are too many factors for pure calculation. You have to develop intuitive understanding that complements technical knowledge. Her explanation was honest, but incomplete, and she could see that it didn't satisfy the questioning competitors. They wanted concrete formulas and replicable techniques, not philosophical approaches to marksmanship that couldn't be easily learned or copied. Kane nodded slowly as he listened to her explanation, recognizing something in her approach that resonated with his own combat experience. I've seen shooters who could do things that didn't match the textbooks, he said. Usually the ones who had learned to trust their instincts as much as their training. It's not something you can teach from a manual. His words provided some validation for Maria's approach, but they also highlighted the gulf between her capabilities and those of shooters trained exclusively within military systems. Her success represented something that couldn't be easily replicated or institutionalized. As the official proceedings concluded and competitors began to disperse, Maria found herself surrounded by a mixture of congratulations, continued skepticism, and requests for interviews from military journalists who had been observing the competition. Her victory had transcended the boundaries of a simple marksmanship contest, becoming something approaching a news event. But even as she accepted official recognition and answered questions from reporters, Maria could feel the undercurrent of resistance and resentment from some quarters. Her success had disrupted established hierarchies and challenged assumptions about who belonged at the top of military sniper communities. Chun and Rodriguez departed with barely concealed anger. Their conversation focused on plans to request official investigations and challenge the competition results through formal channels. Their reaction suggested that they viewed her success as a threat to their own reputations rather than an expansion of understanding about human marksmanship potential. As evening approached and the Nevada desert began to cool, Maria found herself alone at the firing line where she had achieved her record-breaking shots. The targets were barely visible in the gathering darkness, and the distances that had seemed manageable during daylight now appeared almost impossible. She thought about her grandfather's words about becoming part of the system rather than fighting it, and she realized that her success had created a new kind of challenge. Proving that she could shoot at unprecedented distances had been difficult, but managing the consequences of that success might prove even more demanding. The competition was over, but Maria Blackfeather's real test was just beginning. She had established herself as something unique in the military sniper community, and that achievement would bring both opportunities and obstacles that she couldn't yet imagine. 6 months after the Nevada competition, the nickname Native Ghost had spread through military sniper communities across all branches of service. The moniker carried different meanings depending on who spoke it. To some, it represented respect for unprecedented marksmanship capabilities. To others, it suggested something unnatural or unexplainable that challenged their understanding of shooting fundamentals. Maria Blackfeather found herself assigned to a Joint Special Operations Task Force, where her extreme distance shooting capabilities had attracted attention from the highest levels of military command. The assignment came with opportunities she had never imagined, but also with scrutiny and expectations that sometimes felt overwhelming. The task force briefing room in Afghanistan was filled with operators from every branch of the military, each representing elite units with impressive reputations. But as Maria entered the room, conversations quieted and attention focused on her with an intensity that had become familiar over the past several months. Colonel James Patterson, the task force commander, addressed the assembled operators with the kind of direct authority that came from years of combat leadership. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a situation that requires capabilities at the absolute edge of what's possible in military operations. Intelligence has identified a high-value target who will be accessible only through extreme long-range engagement. Behind him, a large display screen showed satellite imagery of a remote valley in eastern Afghanistan, where Taliban leadership had established a meeting location that they believed was beyond the range of coalition forces. The target area was positioned nearly 4,000 meters from the nearest concealed position that could accommodate a sniper team. Standard engagement ranges for this type of operation are typically under 2,000 meters, Patterson continued. But intelligence indicates that our target will be vulnerable for less than 30 minutes, and alternative approaches would require weeks of planning with significantly higher risk to personnel. Chief Petty Officer Chen shifted uncomfortably in his chair, recognizing the implications of the briefing. Since the Nevada competition, he had been forced to acknowledge that his understanding of extreme distance shooting capabilities had been limited. The presence of the native ghost in this briefing suggested that impossible shots were becoming operationally relevant. Staff Sergeant Blackfeather, Patterson addressed Maria directly. Intelligence estimates suggest that successful engagement would require shots at approximately 3,900 meters under field conditions that may include variable winds and temperature extremes. Based on your demonstrated capabilities, we're requesting your assessment of mission feasibility. The room fell silent as every operator waited for her response. Maria had become accustomed to being asked whether impossible shots were actually possible, but the weight of operational consequences made each assessment feel crucial. The distance is within demonstrated capabilities, she replied carefully. But success would depend on environmental conditions at the time of engagement and the ability to establish adequate observation of the target area prior to the shot. Her measured response reflected months of learning to balance confidence in her abilities with realistic assessment of tactical challenges. Extreme distance shooting wasn't just about marksmanship. It required comprehensive understanding of battlefield conditions and operational constraints. Patterson nodded approvingly. Intelligence suggests we'll have approximately 6 hours of observation time before the target becomes vulnerable. Weather forecasts indicate manageable wind conditions, but terrain elevation will create temperature variations that could affect bullet trajectory. The briefing continued with detailed discussion of infiltration routes, communication protocols, and extraction procedures. But Maria could sense that the entire operation had been designed around her specific capabilities, a recognition of her unique skills that was both flattering and intimidating. As the briefing concluded and operators began to disperse, Chen approached her with an expression that had evolved from hostility to something approaching professional respect. "I wanted to apologize for my behavior during the competition," he said quietly. "I didn't understand what I was seeing, and I responded poorly." His admission represented a significant shift from the skepticism and accusations that had characterized his initial reaction to her performance. 6 months of subsequent operations had demonstrated that her capabilities were consistently reproducible rather than based on luck or hidden advantages. "I've been studying extreme distance shooting since Nevada," he continued. "I'm starting to understand that there are aspects of marksmanship that aren't covered in standard training programs. Your approach involves factors that most of us have never learned to recognize." Maria appreciated his honesty, recognizing that it required considerable humility for someone of his reputation to acknowledge limitations in his own understanding. "My grandfather always said that the best shooters are the ones who never stop learning," she replied. "There's always something new to discover about how the environment affects bullet flight." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Master Sergeant Kane, whose own presence on the task force represented recognition of his extensive combat experience. His attitude toward Maria had evolved from initial skepticism to genuine mentorship, and he had become one of her strongest advocates within the special operations community. "Ready for another impossible shot?" he asked with a slight smile. "I've been following your operational reports, and your consistency at extreme distances is starting to make believers out of some very skeptical people." His words reflected a broader shift in military sniper communities, where Maria's repeated successes were forcing doctrinal changes in understanding of human marksmanship potential. Training programs were beginning to incorporate elements of environmental awareness that had previously been dismissed as unscientific. The mission launched 48 hours later under cover of darkness, with Maria's sniper team infiltrating to an observation position that provided clear line of sight across the target valley. The actual distance to the projected target location measured 3,934 meters, slightly beyond even her Nevada competition performance. As dawn approached, Maria established her shooting position and began the careful process of environmental assessment that had become her signature approach to extreme distance engagements. Temperature gradients across the valley were creating complex wind patterns, while altitude differences between her position and the target area would affect both bullet drop and atmospheric density. Her spotter, Staff Sergeant Michael Torres from the Air Force, had been specially trained to support extreme distance operations. His role involved not just target identification and range estimation, but environmental monitoring that could detect changes affecting bullet trajectory over the extended flight time. Temperature differential between our position and target area is approximately 12 degrees, Torres reported quietly. Wind patterns are variable, but generally favorable, with primary flow from northwest at 6 to 8 miles per hour. Maria nodded, absorbing the information while continuing her own assessment through the rifle scope. At nearly 4,000 meters, the target area was barely visible even through high-powered optics, appearing as subtle changes in terrain rather than distinct features. The waiting period stretched through the morning hours, with intelligence updates confirming that the target was approaching the designated meeting location. Maria used the time to observe environmental changes, watching heat mirage patterns and wind indicators that would influence her shot when the opportunity presented itself. At 1,347 hours, surveillance assets confirmed that the high-value target had arrived at the meeting location and was positioned within the designated engagement zone. Maria had perhaps 30 minutes to make a shot that would eliminate a key Taliban commander while avoiding collateral damage to other personnel in the area. Target confirmed in position, Torres whispered. Range 3,934 meters. Wind conditions stable. Temperature holding steady. Maria settled into her final shooting position, allowing her breathing to slow and her heart rate to stabilize. At this distance, even minor physiological variations could influence bullet trajectory, requiring complete physical and mental calm. The shot felt perfect from the moment she began applying pressure to the trigger. Every element of the system seemed aligned: rifle, ammunition, environmental conditions, and her own physical and mental state. The bullet's flight time at that distance would exceed 5 seconds, requiring faith in calculations and environmental assessment rather than immediate visual confirmation. Good shot, Torres reported as he tracked the bullet's impact through his spotting scope. Target down. Mission successful. The confirmation of successful engagement at nearly 4,000 meters established a new operational record for confirmed military kills, but Maria felt little satisfaction in the achievement. The target had been a legitimate military objective, but taking a human life at such extraordinary distance created psychological complexities that she was still learning to process. The extraction proceeded without incident, and the team returned to base to discover that word of the record-breaking shot had already reached the highest levels of military command. General David Mitchell, the regional commander, personally debriefed Maria on the techniques and capabilities that had enabled the successful mission. Staff Sergeant, your performance is forcing us to reconsider some fundamental assumptions about battlefield capabilities, Mitchell told her during the classified debriefing. We're looking at establishing new training programs based on your methodologies, but we need to understand what makes your approach different from standard marksmanship instruction. The question had been asked dozens of times over the past months, and Maria had struggled to provide answers that satisfied military leadership's need for replicable procedures and training protocols. Her grandfather's teachings didn't translate easily into institutional methodologies. Sir, my approach emphasizes understanding the entire shooting system rather than just calculating individual variables, she explained. At extreme distances, there are too many environmental factors for pure mathematical calculation. Successful shooting requires integrative awareness that combines technical knowledge with intuitive understanding. Her explanation was as complete as she could make it, but she could see that it still didn't provide the concrete formulas and step-by-step procedures that the military preferred for training programs. Her capabilities seemed to exist in the space between science and art, making them difficult to systematize. Over the following months, Maria found herself increasingly involved in advanced training programs designed to develop extreme distance shooting capabilities among other military snipers. Her role evolved from operational shooter to instructor and researcher, helping to bridge the gap between her unique abilities and transferable techniques. The challenge was significant because her grandfather's traditional teachings couldn't be directly transplanted into military training environments. Instead, she had to identify the underlying principles that could be adapted to work within existing military educational frameworks. Working with ballistics experts and training specialists, Maria began developing instructional approaches that emphasized environmental awareness, system integration, and intuitive understanding alongside traditional technical skills. The programs weren't producing shooters who could match her extreme distance capabilities, but they were creating snipers who could extend their effective ranges well beyond previous standards. Chen had become one of her most dedicated students. His initial skepticism transformed into genuine desire to understand principles he had never been taught. "I'm starting to see patterns in environmental conditions that I never noticed before," he reported during one training session. "It's like learning a completely new language for reading the landscape." His progress, while not approaching her own capabilities, demonstrated that elements of her approach could be learned and applied by other shooters. The key was developing the patience and observational skills required for true environmental integration. As her reputation grew within military communities, Maria also attracted attention from civilian law enforcement agencies, international military organizations, and even academic researchers studying human performance capabilities. Her achievements had transcended military boundaries, becoming a subject of broader scientific and tactical interest. But despite the recognition and opportunities, Maria remained grounded by her grandfather's teachings about the responsibility that came with exceptional abilities. "The gift isn't in the shooting," Joseph Blackfeather had told her. "The gift is in understanding when not to shoot, and why the shot matters." His wisdom became increasingly relevant as her capabilities attracted requests for missions and engagements that tested ethical boundaries as much as technical skills. The ability to eliminate targets at previously impossible distances carried moral complexities that standard military training hadn't prepared her to handle. 3 years after the Nevada competition that had launched her reputation, Staff Sergeant Maria Blackfeather received promotion to Sergeant First Class and assignment to a newly created position as Senior Instructor for the Army's Extreme Distance Marksmanship Program. Her role would involve training the next generation of military snipers while continuing to push the boundaries of human shooting capabilities. The assignment represented recognition that her achievements had fundamentally changed military understanding of marksmanship potential. What had begun as an individual accomplishment had evolved into institutional transformation, with new training programs, equipment specifications, and operational doctrines being developed based on her demonstrated capabilities. As she prepared for her new role, Maria reflected on the journey from that first day in Nevada when her presence had been questioned and her abilities doubted. The Native Ghost had become more than a nickname. It represented a bridge between traditional knowledge and modern military capabilities, proving that exceptional performance could emerge from unexpected sources. Her grandfather's teachings about integration, environmental awareness, and respectful use of deadly skills had found new expression in contemporary military operations. The ancient wisdom had proven remarkably relevant to modern challenges, demonstrating that effective learning often required combining multiple sources of knowledge rather than relying on single approaches. The future would bring new challenges and opportunities, but Maria Blackfeather had established herself as something unique in military history. A shooter whose capabilities redefined the possible while honoring the responsibilities that came with exceptional skills. The Ghost had become legend, and the legend was just beginning to understand its full potential.